and this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs, memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
You are live.
Aloha. Welcome. This is Janet Kira Lessin, and today is, which one is this? Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, like I said, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. And our producer is the Mad Painter. And our guest is Aleksandar Petakov. And I'm trying to read the bio, and I was running around, and now I don't have it up. Okay. Let me see if I got it right here. Okay, hold on. There we go. We had trouble getting on. Aleksandar Petakov is a documentary filmmaker and multimedia artist, as well as an avid adventurer and constantly searching for the unknown. Traveling across the United States and the world, Aleksander has researched various cryptozoological creatures. Hold on, getting feedback. 1 second. Okay, there we go. Such as Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, the Lake Champlain Monster, mystery.
Okay, we're back on now. This is going to have to be, you're going to hear a little echo for a minute until I get this straightened out. Last host is trying to get back on the air. There we go. Okay, now you can continue, and we're on air again. He has a little confusion about the time difference.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like there's a lot of time zones going on.
He's in the UK, so he was thinking he had another hour to go, and he hijacked the station from us just then. So I fixed it. He can't do it now. So.
Sure.
But go ahead about Champ. When was the earliest? Do you know when the earliest recording of him was?
Well, it's kind of debated. It seems from my research that it was around the 1700s or the 1800s. The first official recorded sighting is, in the early 1800s. People believe that there was a sighting that happened with Samuel de Champlain, who the lake is named after, which would have been in the 1600s, but that actually was probably not the case, because what he described was more of a garfish, which are this large sort of species of fish that live in Lake Champlain. But there was an article put out I believe in the 60s or the 70s, where somebody claimed that he had seen some kind of 20-foot monster, and after that article it snowballed, and a lot of people believe that to be the first sighting, but that's probably not the case. He did talk about seeing strange creatures in the St. Lawrence Seaway, which could have been walruses or other critters, but the first kind of official sighting would have been one that appeared in a newspaper in the early 1800s, and that century essentially had most of those older sort of sightings that have taken place, and that's very interesting in any sort of phenomena like this, because you have sort of a history of it. It's not just that sightings are happening 10 years ago or modern day. You have sort of a consistency of sightings, and while they might vary a little bit, there's definitely sort of an overlap in a lot of the sightings. So it's very interesting to observe some of those older sightings and to read about them and find out more about them.
Well, is there any prominent people who have seen this, or is it just everyday people? Or
it's a little bit of both. I mean, there are people around the lake who are reputable, who are well known in their communities, upstanding citizens that have seen something unusual that perhaps they can't explain. And it's very interesting when somebody who has lived by the lake their entire life sees a sighting, or sees something they cannot explain, rather. There are a lot of the sightings perhaps can be explained with misidentifications or people who aren't as familiar with it, but when there's sort of an unmistakable encounter that happens, it's somebody with a reputation that they really only have to lose by coming forward with a story like this. Once they come forward with a story like that, that's very intriguing. It kind of makes you wonder.
Lake Champlain is one of the deepest lakes in North America, isn't it?
I'm not sure if it's the deepest. It goes to about
one of
the
deepest. I'm not sure if it's the deepest or not.
Yeah, I think it goes to around 400 something feet deep. I think 420 feet. There's some various counts that have taken place, over the years, trying to figure out the depth, and I think 420 is around the depth of that. So I'm not sure. I assume there are deeper lakes. It is one of the largest lakes in North America. It's in the top 10. So you have a lot of these lakes. The Great Lakes, of course, are the top 5, and then you have Lake Champlain, which was at one point considered a Great Lake, and then it had that title revoked because it is a lot smaller than any of the other Great Lakes, but it is definitely a huge lake. I mean, it's 120 miles long, and it's almost 12 miles wide at its widest point. So it's
is this in New York?
Sorry?
Is it in New York?
Yeah, so on one side...
It's one of the Finger Lakes.
It's not one of the Finger Lakes, but it has a border with New York. So it's essentially the border between Vermont and New York for more than about 3/4 of Vermont. That side of its border with New York is the lake.
I'm confusing it with one of the Finger Lakes. I'm sorry.
No problem. Yeah, it's confusing with a lot of the lakes, but in New England, it's a pretty well-known lake, pretty well-known body of water. People jokingly call it the West Coast of New England, just because it's such a kind of fixture in that area. But it has a small bay that butts into Canada, into the province of Quebec. Very, very tiny portion of the lake is actually there. So it is on an international boundary, however. And then the rest of the lake is just there, and it kind of winds down in its more southern portion to almost like a river at some parts. And it ends right at Whitehall, New York, which is actually where the U.S. Navy was founded. And there's a lot of stuff about Bigfoot in that area as well.
I find this interesting. Is there any comparison with it in Ogopogo? I mean, are they kind of the same type of creature, or are there differences?
I mean, I think it's hard to say. Nobody really knows exactly what either of these creatures are, and if they exist or not. That's obviously very much still up for debate. There's people who have seen something that they're convinced, but I think it's important to look at it sort of open-minded. And generally, the descriptions of what Ogopogo is and Champ are somewhat different. I think Ogopogo is, and there's some overlap, but I'm certainly no expert in Ogopogo or anything. Not that I am in Champ, just I happen to know a little bit, having done the series and being very interested in it. But Champ, the general description is sort of a plesiosaur type, prehistoric dinosaur-looking thing. I've even heard giant turtle. So essentially, it has sort of a larger body and a long neck. And in many of the sightings, that includes humps and almost like serpent-like. A lot of the older sightings describe it much more as a serpent, even a sea serpent. So it definitely has that sort of snake-like appearance. And, there have been some on-land sightings and sightings in other places as well.
There we go. We're going to get Sasha now. He finally got it straightened out, I believe. So, there we go. Sasha has joined us.
Oh, you found Sasha?
Yep, he's here.
Yeah, my internet was down. I didn't know it. I'm coming to you on my Skype on my phone, which seems to work really well. Let me see if I can get his phone set up for next week.
Mine's fine, right?
I'm very interested in this whole subject. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and when I was a little girl, my friend's mother, one of my best friend's mother, his mother was from North Carolina, and she talked about the banshee that chased her wagon when they were doing a Halloween, pumpkin ride type thing, right? And it was terrifying. Have you heard of a banshee? And then when I went to West Virginia about 20 years after that to a writers' conference, they were talking about this banshee. Did you ever hear about the banshee in the Northeast?
Not really, no. I don't really do much of the ghost sort of stuff, so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I've heard of various stories of ghosts all across the Northeast.
Well, this wasn't a ghost. It was a wolfen-type, larger than a wolf, like a wolfen-type being that had red glowing eyes, and it wasn't afraid to chase a whole, wagon full of people. So that doesn't like a wolf would probably stay away from a bunch of people like that. But
doesn't sound very pleasant.
And then when I was a little girl, and I can't quite get the year, but I think it was probably, I have to look it up again. I had that a few weeks ago. The Mothman. Have you covered anything about the Mothman?
So I haven't really done any projects on the Mothman. I'm aware of it, and I've had friends who have done, books and documentaries on the subject, and it's a very interesting sort of field because it covers a lot, I think, with the Mothman. Some people consider it part of cryptozoology in the sense that the creature itself may be a cryptid, but there seems to be more of a sort of paranormal overlap or an overlap in other strange phenomena like UFO and Men in Black and that sort of thing. And it's a pretty interesting case. I mean, I've been to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and it's definitely an interesting area. You have the TNT area, which are these sort of little kind of bunkers that they used to store a lot of the dynamite and a lot of these dangerous materials. And that's an area where a lot of the sightings have taken place over time. And the story with the bridge collapsing, of course, everyone knows it from the famous movie there with Richard Gere. But yeah, it's a very interesting case for sure. I don't know, the ins and outs of it. I have kind of other subjects I'm more familiar with, but it's something I've definitely, I've been interested in many of these cases, and it's one of those ones that you always hear about and you always read about.
Well, let's have Dr. Lessin chime in. Hi, sweetheart.
Yeah, aloha. I just now got on, but I'm really interested in particularly the ancestor of some of the varieties of Bigfoot, Homo erectus, and that the Anunnaki, whom I'm a scholar of, basically were so taken by Homo erectus's ability to communicate telepathically and its compassion for other creatures, that they wanted some of that for themselves, and plus the great strength and everything else that Bigfoot has, and that's why they're incorporated so largely into our genomes. They're playing for USC to this day.
Right. So, Aleksander, we have two Alexanders, although they're spelled differently. Sasha's name is Aleksander as well, but Aleksandar Petakov. So what are your specialties? I'm sorry we're late getting in here to the show, but you were mentioning I think the cats that are everywhere. When I moved to Maui in '97, and for about the first 5 years, people were seeing a large cat.
Very interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of anything on Maui. That's. I've been to Hawaii a couple times, but I've never heard of any sort of stories like that. But across the U.S., you have sightings of big cats. Primarily, of course, where the places where they're interesting are in the eastern part of the country, where these animals are technically extinct. In most of these areas, the acknowledged range of the mountain lion, for example, is essentially the Rocky Mountains, North and South Dakota, and a little bit into the Midwest, and then everything west of the Rockies, essentially. So California, the Pacific Northwest, up into Canada, and you actually have a small population of Florida panthers, which are very similar to mountain lions that live in the state of Florida, sort of the Everglades in that area. But you're having sightings happening in places where these creatures used to exist. And kind of what I've been looking at is New England. That's the area that I live in, and as far as I can remember, even before I got into all this stuff, I always heard about people saying they saw mountain lion out in the woods. We have a lot of forest here in New England. Maine and New Hampshire are two of the most forested states in the country. A lot of prey, a lot of mountain ranges. There's a lot of space for different wildlife. We have 30,000 black bears. But people have always talked about seeing mountain lion. That's something I always found interesting. Most of the sightings, 70-80% of them, are the standard sort of tawny colored mountain lion like you would expect to see, and then there's a small percentage of sightings that are of a black panther or a darker colored animal, which is very intriguing because mountain lions are not known to have the sort of pigmentation to appear in that color of their fur. And there are black panthers and jaguars and those sorts of animals, but they don't live in North America. Or at least not in the United States. Native to this area. It's a different story if they're a released pet. But with the mountain lions, so it's very interesting because you have these decades of sightings, and I kind of brought it upon myself to say, hey, why don't I take a look at that? Because that's something that's going on right around here. It's not as, let's say, exotic as Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, which everyone knows about, but something like mountain lions is extremely plausible because these creatures did exist in this area until they were extirpated and basically hunted to extinction, forced to flee by humans when this area was being kind of cultivated in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So it's people can believe it because it's something that's much more, I'd say, tangible than Bigfoot to the general population. Because it is a species that does already exist. So it's been an interesting examination so far.
Has anybody captured any mountain lions on their trail cams that you're aware of?
So, yes and no. The reason I say that is because it's kind of up for debate. It's sort of a middle ground. So there's a lot of people out there trying to capture clips of mountain lions, and there's some alleged photos. And I just saw a video from, I think, last week. This wasn't a trail camera, but it was just last week up in Maine. They saw what they believed on a frozen pond across the pond was a mountain lion, and they found tracks that were kind of very interesting, large cat-like prints. The phone video was too far away to see, but there are other pieces of footage and photo that I've been shown from game cameras that are kind of ambiguous. It's hard to tell. Certainly there's a certain degree of it where bobcats are seen, and that's where the confusion comes about. But some of them are undeniable. I mean, there was a video taken right in Newfoundland, right across the border there with Maine in Canada, of a mountain lion in a field. Somebody took it on their phone, and it was clearly a mountain lion. And this was, very close to a area in Maine where somebody had claimed they had gotten a mountain lion on a game camera which was denied by the sort of Fish and Wildlife Services there in Maine. But, does a mountain lion recognize an international border? What would stop it essentially from just going back and forth? Because they're just following food, and there's plenty of food in New England if these animals are returning to their native range, which is sort of what some of the people involved believe is going on.
Interesting. Sash, you have any questions, comments?
Well, just about the Canadian fellow that wrote a best-selling book about a Bengal tiger that he let loose in the Gulf of Mexico. Did you hear anything like that?
Wow, I've not. That doesn't ring a bell, but I can imagine it was an interesting social experiment.
He lived in Toronto. He told all about it. It won some kind of film awards too.
Wow.
Oh, that was The Life of Pi. Was that fictional, or that was supposed to be true, based on truth?
Oh,
the movie The Life of Pi.
Yeah, I think that was supposed to be fictional. I'm not entirely sure though. I never really got into that.
Yeah, it won the Academy Award.
yeah, I know it was obviously a kind of a famous movie at the time, and I think it was animated or something like that. But yeah. Yeah,
they have to use they have to do something with the lion so it doesn't eat people, so they animate them now. Yeah, it's a little bit hard being in a close proximity with a Bengal tiger, for that long. Yeah. So what? Okay, what is the story of the big cats? Does anybody know when did they officially go extinct? The ones in the Northeast, the mountain lions. When did they officially become extinct?
Sure. So officially they're in most of the New England region, and I'd say the Northeast. So that would include New York State, Pennsylvania, some of the other areas. Officially, they were supposed to go extinct in the late 1800s, and the last sort of critters that were killed off would have been around that time period. And you have some of them in states like Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. You have the stuffed animals, or the stuffed mountain lion rather, are in museums, and they can kind of point to exactly when it was killed. So it was around that time, and that's what that term extirpated means, that they were basically hunted off from this area. Doesn't mean they're extinct as a species. It just means that their range has changed a lot because of human interference. And like I said, that means their range is mostly in the West Coast, but you do have more and more populations showing up in North Dakota and even places like Wisconsin and Minnesota. There's a lot more confirmed sightings and DNA evidence there than there is in New England. But the main sort of theories that are floating around is that mountain lions are returning to the Northeast, and this has been essentially an idea for a while. And in 2011 in Connecticut, there was a mountain lion that was killed on a freeway in an urban part of Connecticut. And this particular cat had traveled all the way from North Dakota. It had been seen in spots along the road, or along its trail there that it had taken, and had possibly gone into upstate New York and then into Massachusetts and other areas before it met its demise. So the idea is that you have these juvenile males that once they kind of get kicked out of their family group, they try and go on and form their own families, so they can just wander aimlessly. And if they're going through areas that have a lot of food and resources, like much of the Northeast does, they wouldn't really have trouble sustaining themselves. The problem is finding females. That's something that they're probably not doing. So there's all these sightings going on. That's sort of the main theory, that they're just critters from the Western populations that are moving back east, reclaiming this sort of territory and not reproducing. The other theory that I've heard from some people who have been in sort of this research for a lot longer is that they never went extinct, and that there were actually sort of little populations that adapted and learned how to stay away from humans, and as time has gone by and the threat of humans has diminished, they've come out a little more. And then the third sort of theory is the denial of everything, and saying that they're not here at all. They're just people. It's all wishful thinking, or it's completely misidentifications of bobcats or other cats and other animals. But like I said, we have had one confirmed case in New England, at least, where a mountain lion was killed. And I interviewed a police officer who saw this particular cat just a few days before it was killed. He saw it cross a road, and police officers are people in society that we sort of give higher credibility to because they're trained to be observers and they uphold the law, of course. So they're held in a certain respect. So when a police officer sees an animal and is able to describe it as a mountain lion, and nobody believes him, that's sort of the struggle. And then a few days later, there's a confirmed case where one gets killed. That's interesting. So how many of these sightings that we have going on that are not confirmed by a body in the end up actually being true or not? And that's very interesting. So, like I said, there's definitely evidence. And as I've uncovered in my project, there's also sort of a little bit of an insidious nature going on with sort of the denial of some of the sightings. And I'm not saying there's a grand conspiracy behind it, but if you follow the money, it may be a little bit difficult for some of these state wildlife agencies to deal with mountain lions and other creatures. So it's easier to kind of brush it up under the rug than it is to deal with the reality that these animals might be just passing through a state.
But, Alex, it's not just a matter of passing through. They may be critical to the ecological balance of too many geese and too many deer or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a valid point. I mean, something I've even heard recently, just interviewing biologists and some of the people that are associated with, the state fish and wildlife here in New Hampshire and in Vermont, is that we have ample amount of food resources in New England because there really are no big predators for some of the prey species. So you have explosions of deer population throughout the Northeast, huge numbers, and there's really not much that hunts these things aside from humans. I mean, you have coyotes, but they're not up to that level as an apex predator like a mountain lion would be. Even gray wolves. I mean, anytime gray wolves try and cross the border from Canada, they're essentially found and hunted, and the few stragglers that have made their way from established populations of wolves, which are in the same position as mountain lions, they've been extirpated. These wolves are killed. There was one that was killed in Massachusetts a couple of years ago. So they don't really get far. So something like a mountain lion, if it was in this area, like I said, if it was, let's say, a juvenile male just kind of wandering around, it would have so much food resources. It wouldn't really have to do anything. I mean, it could, because there are so many deer, there are so many prey species and there's really not much to hunt them because we don't have like an established mountain lion population like you would in Colorado, where they fit right into the ecological sort of tree there and into the ecosystem. So it's definitely something that comes up, as well as the how would it affect the environment? Because it probably would. I mean, all animals do essentially, and we're all part of this sort of chain and this ecosystem. So that's something perhaps that the states don't really want to deal with. And I'm not saying this to kind of pin it on them or blame them, but that just seems to be the case. And it just breeds a lot of distrust. A lot of people I've talked to believe that there's a conspiracy going on, and it doesn't surprise them at all that the state would deny confirmed DNA evidence that's been found in mountain lions, because it's just a lot easier to not deal with it, essentially.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you think they may be following some kind of instinct to go a certain trail, to go a certain path, just like birds? They fly. Why would a cat go all the way from North Carolina way up north unless there was some kind of primal calling to go back or something?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a good question. It's really hard, of course, to get into the mind of an animal, right? But there's so much that we don't understand about sort of instincts. We as humans have certain instincts. We're scared of certain animals like snakes and sometimes birds. A lot of people have these sort of fears which others might deem irrational, but these were all ingrained in us from our ancestors who were hunted by these creatures who were in much more vulnerable states. Now you see someone who's scared of birds and you're kind of like, oh, that's funny. A parrot, what's it going to do to you? But in our past, we had creatures like this that would kill us and would steal children, and snakes and big cats and all these sort of animals. So there's so much we don't know about instinct and what actually may be causing this with animals. There's the concept of infrasound as well. A lot of animals have these abilities which we can't even see. I mean, these are frequencies that we have no way to kind of quantify visually or hearing it. It's just sort of a frequency that's below our spectrum. Yet animals, when there's a big natural disaster, are able to get out of the area because they are kind of in tune with the land and they're able to sense that something is going on. The frequencies are changing, and they can actually communicate using infrasound in a lot of cases. So, I mean, is there possibility that an animal like a mountain lion has some sort of instinctual or they're able to read the lines in the earth? I don't know. It's a good question. I think there's got to be a lot more research done in that sort of field. But for what I can say is that mountain lions, they're, like I said, if they have ample resources at their disposal, they could just wander on forever, basically, until they die of natural cause or they're killed either by a hunter or hit by a car, such as the Connecticut case, because there's nothing stopping them. I mean, like I said, the animals don't recognize international borders or state boundaries or anything like that. They can just kind of go through these areas, and cats are very elusive. Cats are smart, and if you have house cats, you see this kind of behavior on a smaller scale. They're very elusive, they're very cunning, they're extremely intelligent animals, and they know how to get around without being detected, essentially, for the most part, at least, on a level that for them is beneficial because it keeps them hidden.
Can I go back a minute, because to the other hypothesis, sure. In anthropology, we talk about central-based wandering bands and free wandering bands. And what you're saying, if I get it right, is that there's no defined territory in which a group of pride of lions would hang out. They can just follow the food and the climate and whatever, as long as it's good. They don't settle in that same kind of a central base and hang there. Or how do they live?
So, from what I understand, which I'm starting to learn a little bit more about mountain lions overall and their sort of biology, is that, for example, in known populations that we have out west, let's say in a state like Wyoming, they'll say an average mountain lion will have a range that can almost be 100 miles. So they can move within that area, getting food and resources, whatever they need. And I've actually heard people saying, because at the time when the mountain lions were killed off in the east, we weren't really doing studies like we do today on wildlife, so we don't know much about the behavior, how different it was than species out west. Because the ones out west, essentially, if you've been to places like Utah and Wyoming and Colorado, you'll know that it's a very different ecosystem than the East Coast. Here we have a lot more forest, and it's a lot more conjoined. So like I said, New Hampshire, Vermont, some of the highest forested states in the country, you can essentially go for hundreds of miles without hitting a road. You can just keep following forests or very minimal human contact. In a place like Colorado and in the Rockies, you have sparser areas of tree cover and where there are more resources, and maybe on one mountain there will be a forest and there will be plains and other kind of things. So a mountain lion would have to expand its range to have more resources at its disposal, whereas maybe on the East Coast, I've heard people theorize that the mountain lions had a smaller range, which could have been 20, 30 miles, and they could stay within that area and get essentially everything they need. I don't know if that's just a theory I've heard from one of the researchers that I've interviewed, but it's very interesting because you have to imagine that animals adapt differently in different parts of the world, and a mountain lion is essentially a creature that lived across the entirety of North America at one point until our interference diminished their prevalence in North America, which is why they're limited to these sorts of areas. And I'm sure there's a difference between mountain lions just living in a place like British Columbia, where you have the temperate rainforest there on the coast, than there would be a mountain lion living in Arizona. And I've heard, from biologists that there's differences in sort of the coloration in the deserts. They're more of like a tan, blondish color. In other areas, they're darker. And those are regional adaptations. So you'd imagine a similar thing for living in deciduous, continuous forests like we have here on the East Coast. But to kind of answer your question about, if they just kind of followed the food, and that's where the idea of the juveniles, when they are kicked out of the family groups, they are just kind of wandering, trying to find a mate, trying to find somebody to make their own family with, and that's why they can just kind of wander forever. They're just following the food. They don't really have a set range because they're trying to establish themselves with cubs and everything like that. So they're interesting animals because cats are solitary for the most part, and mountain lions, aside from family groups, they kind of tend to do their thing or be on their own rather.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, interesting.
I should say, I'm of course I'm not a biologist. I'm just having, doing this project, you kind of learn about things. And I've interviewed biologists and people who are, we have like a nature center here in New Hampshire where I got a lot of footage of mountain lions. They have 2 orphan mountain lions from out west. Somebody had killed their a hunter had accidentally killed their mother, or intentionally rather, and had discovered there were cubs, and he did the right thing and called, Fish and Game, and then they put these two orphaned mountain lions up for adoption, and this center in New Hampshire happened to adopt them. And just last week, I was there filming with one of the animal trainers that they have there, and they're magnificent animals to see up close. And they're still very much wild animals, even if they're in captivity, and they wouldn't be able to live in the wild essentially on their own. But they're pretty impressive to see up close like that. We were 3 feet away from one that was leaning up on a metal gate that they had, and she was feeding it mice, and it was just standing there, and it was purring, and you could hear it meowing. I mean, I didn't know that mountain lions could do that, but turns out they're actually the largest of the lesser cats, which are animals that include, bobcats and lynx and those sorts of things, whereas lions and tigers, I guess, are in a higher sort of class of felines. So it's very interesting to see these creatures up close like that.
Did the guy who shot their mom, was that a crime?
I don't believe so, because I'm really not an expert in that. I don't even know if it was Wyoming or Montana or one of these states, but that's what I was told, that he had been hunting mountain lion. I'm assuming permitted. If not, then I think that it probably would be a crime. I think because they I'm not a hunter, so I don't specifically know, but I know in most states they have sort of a lottery system with hunting, where they have an allocated system where they give a certain amount of tags for a certain amount of animals. So you can only, for example, in New Hampshire, you can only kill a certain amount of moose per year. So they sort of have a lottery system, and then whoever gets those tags are the only ones that are officially able to kill them. I mean, we have poaching going on all across the country in certain areas, and that, of course, is unfortunate, because you're just killing animals at a higher number than Fish and Game is even able to control or monitor, which is really too bad. But I'm not sure if that would have been a crime in that case, but he did the right thing, because he found the cubs, and at least they were able to be salvaged, and they would have probably just died if he had not looked into that, which would have been kind of sad.
Wow.
Thank you.
And they were given them, I can say they're given a pretty good life, because usually animals in captivity, as a lot of people say, it's kind of cruel keeping animals in captivity, but they do have a little bit of longer lifespan, and they have access to more resources being in captivity. Not to justify that, but just saying it's they probably would have just died on their own out there once their mother was killed.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to know Bigfoot.
Yeah, let's shift gears to Bigfoot. Is there anything else you want to tell us about cats before we shift topic?
Sure, I'll just close it off on that. Yeah, just my documentary is essentially just an aim to just bring about a discussion about what is going on, because obviously there's at least 10, let's say, out of all the sightings, let's say they're all not true, there's at least 10 out there that are legitimate. And I know that there's more than that. I'm just using that as a sort of hypothetical situation. So even those 10, you'd have to look at those, and there has to be discussion on what should be done, because clearly there's a big amount of distrust between the public and the state governments and the people who are essentially supposed to be working for us. There's a big disconnect. People don't trust the government. That's, sort of goes along in a lot of ways, but this film is an attempt to just document the subject and people who are interested in it, eyewitnesses, as well as people who represent the states, and get kind of a discussion going about what should be done in the future, and if there is a future for mountain lions in New England, which increasingly it seems like it will happen. So we're going to have to face these sort of questions at one point or another. So why not just start kind of slowly getting the public on board with it? Because you have to coexist with animals. We coexist with black bears, moose, plenty of other species, or in some cases, we don't coexist as well as we should, but there needs to be education on how to live with a large predator like that if it was to be in your midst. They do it in the West Coast, in Colorado, Wyoming, all these places all the time. So it's just something we have to kind of face the reality.
Could those mountain lions bring down a moose, or is a moose too great a creature?
That's a really good question. I'd imagine they probably could. It might be a bit of a task, but moose are massive. I mean, they're the largest animal, I think, in North America, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, up in Alaska, they get the bull moose that are, absolutely massive. I think the only thing that would rival that would probably be a Kodiak bear or a grizzly. But, cats are very interesting. Just to kind of stay on the subject for one more moment here. A story I'm looking into now is of a woman who had her horse kind of attacked by something here in Massachusetts, actually, and it was believed to be a mountain lion. And if you've seen footage of how big cats attack their prey, they jump on the back of the animal, and that's how they kill it. And they essentially try to go for the neck or snap the spine, depending on how large the creature is. So, big cats are not scared to attack prey that's much larger than they are. I mean, they're the top predator. So it's going to be a battle. So I can imagine picturing in my mind a mountain lion, jumping in the back of a moose and trying to take it down. I'm sure it's happened, and I'm sure that is definitely something that they would do.
Okay, so we could take it a step further. One more step further. If you are going to be having mountain lions, instead of having all these horny adolescents, there's no reason why you couldn't manage it by introducing females, and you could deliberately manage the ecology. You don't have to just be a victim of drift,
Yeah, right. That's something I've heard come up as well, and I've asked some of the people that have worked with the states. For example, I've heard numerous times people saying, "Oh, the states just bring the mountain lions in, right, to control the deer population," and it's like, what?
Yes.
I've heard that before, and I don't know the validity of that, but I think there would have to be probably a public discussion if you were to bring in, let's say females for the sake of appeasing sort of the if there's wandering males and that sort of thing, and the probabilities of kind of getting them together, there would probably have to be discussion, when that were to happen. Yeah. But I mean, there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know, and so much that is kept from us in the public. So I suppose anything's possible.
You mean our government lies to us? Oh no!
Oh no, they would never do that.
Never do that. Well, we have a friend that got attacked by a small mountain lion when he was up in Wyoming, and he told us a story about how he had to fight him all by himself, and he ended up killing it.
He was on a horse.
He was on a horse, and he threw it over the horse, and he took it down to the sheriff because it is illegal. He said, "I'm sorry, but it was me or him," and so he was all scratched up. So it was quite a tale. Anyway.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that's similar to a story recently you probably heard about in the news where a guy was jogging in a park in Colorado and he was attacked by a smaller mountain lion, and he actually managed to choke it to death and killed it.
But, we heard that one. Yeah.
And I saw the press conference with him, and I mean, it was amazing how he was able to do that. If that was an adult, I mean, he probably wouldn't have survived. But overall, the attacks that do happen are very rare in general with mountain lions. I've looked at some of the statistics, and throughout the last couple hundred years, there's really only been a handful of attacks in certain areas, and they do happen. And you shouldn't treat these animals, with like you would a domestic house cat. But they, because they are dangerous wild animals and they can be lethal. But they're not as widespread as you'd think with the attacks. And generally, most animals, they just want to get out of the way when they see a human. They don't really want to have anything to do with us. But then there's those individuals like this one in Colorado, whatever pushes them to do this. This case, it was a younger one, so it probably wasn't. It was inexperienced, and for whatever reason, it was attacking this guy, and it ended up losing that fight. So.
Well, I'm just curious, was it male or female? Do you know that?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't, I'm not sure. I'm sure they did a full autopsy to figure it out because, there are things like mange and rabies that can perhaps make animals go crazy. So I'd assume they would do an autopsy after such an animal was to get killed. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, Sash, you want to go to your Bigfoot Sasquatch?
Well, I think we can just initiate the discussion and here. How did you get into it? What did you find out? What's the hottest thing?
With the Sasquatch?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's their range? Is it all over the world? We have,
Yeah. So
what do you know?
It's a very interesting phenomenon. I mean, it's one of the first things that kind of got me into this when I was a kid. Learning about the Yeti, the story of the abominable snowman in the Himalayas, that was a big influence. So generally, it seems like around most of the world there are reports of sort of hairy man-like creatures. North America is obviously not the exception. It just happens to be an area where there seems to be the most sort of sightings. You do have Australia as well. Russia and Siberia, and this is in the modern context. In China, you have the Yeren, and you have the Yeti in the Himalayas, the Almasty in Russia, and Almas in Siberia and the Caucasus, and you have tales across Europe in the Middle Ages of hairy man-like creatures and woodwoses and other sorts of things. In Africa, there are stories as well, and prior to the discovery of the gorilla, that was another one of those stories, was there's a hairy man-like creature that lives in the mountains that the natives told about, and that turned out to be the gorilla. And South America has some variants as well, but mostly it seems that the concentrations are in North America, and there have been sightings in all 50 states, or 49 except for Hawaii, so you guys are kind of left out in that respect. For obvious reasons geographically. There have been sightings in all Canadian provinces as well, and most of the modern sightings come from either North America, Australia, or parts of Southeast Asia, the Himalayas, and China and Russia and that sort of area. Whereas in Europe, of course, Europe has been very micromanaged in terms of the environments there, so there aren't really as many sightings as far as I'm aware of. I mean, maybe there are in certain areas more remote, but those areas have been through a lot since the Middle Ages. They've been very cultivated, and most native wildlife species in a lot of these European countries have been extirpated as well.
So, Hawaii a few years back, though, they found some ruins of the red-haired monster, or not monsters, giants, the giants. So do you cover giants at all in your research?
Not so much. I mean, I'm more interested in kind of the hairy hominids, so that's human-like creatures. I've heard, of course, you hear these stories, red-haired giants in Nevada and other places, and I don't know exactly. I know a lot of people are more into that with sort of biblical connections and Nephilim and that sort of thing, and I don't really, I'm aware of it, of course. I just don't really have a set theory. I'm trying to figure this out for myself, and there's various postulations about what could be going on. You of course, does it even exist? That's a question that comes up, and sort of the more skeptical side, I suppose, would be this is all a product of either human hallucination or some sort of cultural manifestation where we see wildlife or wild men of the woods that kind of are something like us, but they reflect sort of our nature. And then you've got different camps. People believe it's more paranormal. Some people think it's more physical in the sense that this is some sort of a great ape or an ape that's descended from some lineage somewhere along our evolutionary kind of path. And there's obviously a lot of room for debate. And I think the whole kind of Bigfoot research community is very divided among these lines, and nobody really gets along. And there's a lot of different theories. And there's a lot of hoaxes and a lot of crap, to put it frankly, that goes on that muddies the waters. But you come across these sightings, and I've talked to enough people just, over my 4 or 5 years involved in this sort of thing. You talk to enough people, you realize, especially the ones that really, they don't know about the online stuff. They don't watch the TV shows. They just are saying, I saw this thing and I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I know what I saw. What do you tell them? Oh, you're definitely hallucinating, or you're hoaxing me. And once you start talking to people, you kind of get a feel for if they're telling the truth or not. And I can think of, a handful of sightings in my head that really stick out to me as being like, these people saw something. I really want to find out what it is, because, I mean, is there a tangible phenomena behind it? I'd like to believe so. I mean, we'll have to see. And, I've never had an experience that's convinced me one way or the other. I've had some strange experiences that, kind of leave you scratching your head, but nothing you can say, had a visual or something like that. But I've talked to plenty of people who have, and it's very, very interesting. And that's sort of
I want to say one of my really good friends is a Chumash Indian, and he says that the groups of Chumash in Central California regularly came to the same river as a group of Bigfoot, and they left food for them, and they didn't hang out, but they had a sort of this friendly relationship. And this is a reliable witness. A whole bunch of Indians regularly saw these guys. I didn't, but that's what Blue Cloud told me.
Wow, very, very, very interesting. I mean, that kind of ties into a lot of the native mythology and folklore. And I've been to various places in the country, and you talk to some of the indigenous people, and they have the stories about the Sasquatch. That's a word that's taken from a coastal tribe there in British Columbia and that sort of area. But Northern California, I'm talking to the Hoopa and the Yurok tribes, and they were saying, this is sort of a spiritual being in our culture, and it's something that's there. It's like a protector. Other places, throughout history, you have examples of art in different parts of the country of creatures like that, and these people call it, the hairy man of the woods, the hairy giant. Some tribes considered it to be a different tribe of Indians, essentially, that lived off on their own, that did their own thing. In other cases, there was a lot more of an sort of antagonistic relationship. They considered these creatures to be murderers and cannibals that would steal their women and their children, and it's kind of like a boogeyman story. It really depended from tribe to tribe. And as we know, a lot of the native peoples of North America, they were always engaged in a lot of conflict between themselves, and really their stories and their folklore depend from which group you talk to. But with something like the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch, I mean, they have sort of an overlap in a lot of characteristics. It was, just going, for example, to the Smithsonian Native American Museum there, or Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., it's interesting. They have their own depictions of like Sasquatch and wild men, and seeing those is very refreshing. And it's interesting because that's a perspective you don't really hear about. Typically with the subject, you just hear about what people who kind of have gotten into it since the 1950s think. But there was, not only with the Native Americans, but with the settlers and the colonists, there was stories of hairy, they called them wild men. And later when the gorilla was established, it was called, people saw an 8-foot tall gorilla in the woods in Wisconsin, or whatever the case may be. So those perspectives are very interesting, because those are people that were much more in tune with nature than we were. Like I said, both of those groups, essentially, because they were living off the land. So when they have those sorts of stories, it's very interesting. And could it all just be sort of mythology and boogeyman stories to keep kids out of the woods? I mean, I suppose, but if you connect that with some of the modern experiences, it's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, one of the interesting things to me also is Captain Mark Richards, who was with Carter's Delta Force, his private force, went to this meeting with Prince Charles and others and everybody involved in the secret space program in England, and the guards, the people that had the muscle, that were watching over all the kids of the raptors and the humans that had come to and the royals that had come to this meeting, were a Bigfoot. And they actually do have that interdimensionality capability repeatedly from the people that are in the secret space program anyway. What's your take, Janet?
Well, I just watched a YouTube a couple days ago. A woman was out on a kayak by herself, and something happened where she went over the rapids and she fell out and she got hurt, and the Sasquatch had rescued her, and they left her food and they urinated around her. So when the bears and whatever other wildlife would come near her, they'd smell the Sasquatch and they'd run away. And then finally, about day 3, she recovered enough to. And anyway, somebody found her eventually. They started looking for it. It took 3 or 4 days. She would have died. It's on YouTube. I'll have to find it again and put that up on the page.
So, it's wonderful.
Yeah. So there's all these kind of stories. Well, we're coming up on a break in like maybe 30 seconds here. But when we get back, let's talk more about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and what you know about it, Aleksander, and then we'll go into Loch Ness Monster and the Michigan one, and whatever else you want to talk about. So we've got a lot to cover in the next half of the show.
About Xana. Let's talk about the Russian Xana, who bred with the Russians.
Okay, we'll talk about Xana, who's the Russian Alma. Yeah, Alma. Okay, we'll be back in a few minutes. You have about 5 minutes. Enjoy your break.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
some more speed records in this day and age. You need coverage.
Coverage? Oh, you mean them little root weevils that crawl around popping off cameras in your face?
Those root weevils write history.
Many of you know that quote by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." Well, you can, and Event Horizons will give you those truths. So when you're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore from that memorable CNN network, you'll know just what to do. We will draw you in and become your news addiction at Event Horizons. Join us Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time at freedomslips.com. Revolution Radio. Our world team members are Dennis Fetcho, John Ilias, David Dunger, Halakas MD, Melanie Bridgeton, Jim Mars, Paula Harris, John Trallo, Maria Payan, Christopher Husser, DODDS, Jonathan Orchard, and me, your anchor, Dr. Robin Falco.
If you decide not to volunteer, it will not be held against you in any way.
Sounds dangerous.
It is. Very dangerous.
Count me in.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
In breaking news, a visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a 5th-dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs, memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio, and I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with co-host Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin, and our producer, a mad painter, Thomas Becker, and our guest is Alexander Plakov. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation this week. And we really need your donation. And we thank you very much for your donation. And the Mad Painter, where are we in our fundraising? And do we have any specials?
We have $13.84 and we need $25.50. That's not too bad. We're a little past halfway of the month, so it ain't too bad. And yes, we have a special still for the month of March for a $160 donation. You get a 5-ounce silver bar, and you have to put your name and address in the comment thing on PayPal in order to, so we can mail it to you. If not, we're just going to keep the money and keep the silver.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. You know, I was just looking at Alexander's bio, and he mentions the Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts and the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea. So I want to talk about that, too. But I know, Dr. Lessin, are you there? I know we wanted to get back to Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Say hi again.
Yeah, I certainly do. From my discipline, which is anthropology, for a long time we had been under the influence of a spurious theory, that is, something wrong about how species developed through something called macroevolution, and there was supposed to be, from the lemur and tertius little hairy primates, eventually, step by step, through missing links, because we didn't have the bones, till you get to Homo sapiens sapiens. But that is not true at all. After 140 years, there hasn't been any missing link. There's been rather interventionist, and we have a lot of evidence from the ancient Sumerian texts and things about how that might have been. But so microevolution is totally true. You can see how bills get bigger and smaller, or horns bigger or smaller. On continents, the creatures get larger. On islands, they get smaller, and so forth. But you don't get you get very little intergenous interbreeding. And so the Sasquatch is not our. Was a fully developed creature that was here all together, and with its close relatives. We have histories from the Council of Hotana about how it was decided how the brainstem of all the earthling creatures that had a chance of surviving would be, and so forth. Anyway, so I'm really excited about Sasquatch and the importance of Sasquatch, not only in showing that evolution was interventionist and made great big jumps all at once rather than gradual, for one thing, and also the whole idea of interdimensionality and the importance of being able to telepathically communicate. So I think very, very important, and I want to hear more about Sasquatch.
Okay, back to you, Aleksander.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting subject. I think before the break you were talking about a case where a woman said that she was kind of rescued by some of these creatures. I mean, I don't know that particular story. I just know one of the historical sort of cases was a story by a guy named Albert Ostman, which I believe happened in the 1950s in Canada, where he claimed that he was kidnapped by a group of these creatures and was kept by them. You know, there was a family group, and he was able to escape because he gave a can of tobacco to the sort of the male in the group, and he took too much and kind of gave him a nicotine high and sort of freaked out, and at which point he escaped. And that's the story. I mean, I don't know the validity of it. There's been a lot of doubt cast on it by certain researchers that were first involved in the subject, but like I was mentioning earlier, with a lot of these older cultures and the similar stories overlapping. And from what I understand with human evolution overall, is that we used to think it was, as Dr. Lessin was mentioning, this kind of very linear sort of thing. But it's in the past, just from when I was a kid, for example, 20 years, our understanding of evolution has changed a lot. It isn't really a linear line. It's more of a tree, a family tree, and there's so many different species of ape and creatures that sort of developed along those lines. And you have just the discovery of something like the Homo floresiensis, known as the Hobbit, which was this sort of smaller human-type hominid that existed in parts of Indonesia on some of the islands, Flores and these sorts of areas. And that was a groundbreaking discovery. You've had the discovery of the Denisovans and other sort of Neanderthal-type creatures in the Caucasus and these other areas. And what's interesting is a lot of these areas have modern-day sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures. In the Caucasus, you have sort of more of a Neanderthal-type story, and you've got Zana, which is sort of this story of one of these kind of creatures that apparently was living in a Russian village and interbred with humans. And I don't exactly know the validity of that. I'm not in the position to say that. I just know of the story, and I know that they did do a DNA test a few years ago on a Oxford program that was sort of conducting Bigfoot DNA, and they tested somebody who claimed to be a relative or a descendant of Zana, and they found that person had a higher percentage of African DNA. So the conclusion they reached was that this was either some sort of African slave or somebody from sub-Saharan Africa that had been living in the Caucasus. But the people involved in the story were adamant that it was actually a sort of a hairy creature that was happened to be a female, which is very interesting. And in the case of the Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, that part of Indonesia, you have Sumatra, large area with a lot of biodiversity. You have the tigers there, the Sumatran rhinos, the orangutan, which is one of the only acknowledged great apes that exist. Aside from humans, chimps, and gorillas, you have the orangutan. And in this area, you have a creature called the orang pendek, which is described as a small, hairy, man-like creature, very, very short in stature, a smaller hominid, so not like Bigfoot, where it's a large ape-like creature. it happens in this part of Indonesia, which, isn't exactly the same location as Flores, but it's very interesting that you have that sort of correspondence with tangible evidence of a species that was discovered. And the stories of the orang pendek have been going on for hundreds of years. The indigenous people there have the stories of what they call kind of a wild man, small man in the woods. You have the Dutch, when they were colonizing that area, they have stories from that period of seeing these man-like creatures. And you even had modern sightings of people working with the UN and other organizations that have had sightings that are the witnesses at least are deemed somewhat credible given their professional sort of occupation. So it's very interesting just how much we've learned about human evolution and overall just the amount of hominids and creatures along sort of the ape lineage. There's probably a lot more that we don't know about. What is there still yet to be discovered? I mean, one of the examples that's pointed a lot to in these circles of Bigfoot, one of the theories is a creature called Gigantopithecus, which actually was the largest known ape in history. It was almost 10 feet tall. It was the literal inspiration for King Kong. I mean, this was a creature that was discovered. The only bones that we have to prove that it existed were our teeth bones and parts of a jaw. And many of the fossils were actually discovered in Chinese apothecary stores in the 1920s and 30s by archaeologists and paleontologists that just happened to find them. The Chinese were grinding them up and saying these were dragon bones and putting them into a lot of the medicines that they sort of use. And subsequently, we've been able to find caves with bones of these Gigantopithecus. But, I mean, this was a massive, massive creature. I mean, this thing went extinct about 15,000 years ago. So it would have absolutely interacted with human beings at the time there in China. And, of course, that location is interesting given that you have the story of the Yeren in China, which is sort of the Chinese Bigfoot, and the Himalayas are really not that far off. So you have these sort of stories which are in a lot of cases corroborated with creatures that may have existed. And it's very interesting, and finding the bones of the Gigantopithecus, how difficult that was. And a lot of the theories pointed to porcupines, which are notorious for breaking down organic matter, and especially in the forests. But porcupines would actually eat the bones of the Gigantopithecus. In a lot of these caves where they discovered the teeth, they found, porcupine. I think it was a larger species of porcupine, more of a Pleistocene sort of animal. But, like porcupines today will break down this organic matter, they were doing that with Gigantopithecus. And it's the largest ape, and we have very little to show that it existed. So it's kind of an impressive situation, in my opinion.
I didn't know porcupines did that. Interesting.
Well,
I'm very.
I think you can also add from lots of the ancient writings that there is not just the fact of intervention here and there, but just like we now have what we call CRISPR technology, where we can interfere with the genome, and we can interfere with the what genes you pass on, and so forth. And so did the geneticists from the get-go, from all our records, and right up to the present, with the Greys and their hybrid programs. There is, and certainly our secret military knows how to genetically create what they want to some degree using genes from other species. And so it's really complex. The more you look at what's really happening, or what is really alleged to be happening, I don't know. I've never seen a purple cow myself, but I do believe there are purple cows,
Yeah, I think now people talk about this sort of stuff as if it's conspiracy, but you really don't have to with some of the stuff with genetic testing. I mean, we're getting to the point as a species where in the near future we're going to be able to when let's say you're starting a family, you're going to be able to select certain characteristics in the children. What color eyes, those sorts of things. Getting rid of diseases. That's essentially manipulating our genome and DNA and those sorts of things. And I'm not an expert in that, of course, but I just know from what I've read, you have cloning and these sorts of things which have been going on for quite a while. I mean, I think even the concept of eugenics in a lot of senses, people look at that as a very dark and twisted thing. And in a lot of cases, it very much is. I mean, you have cases where diseases are being tested on people, and it's really it seems disgusting. It really does in a lot of cases. But throughout human history, you have this going on where you have groups of people that are trying to kind of further what they believe is research, and that culminates in all sorts of horrors, like we saw in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. There was, the Soviets had some sort of strange program to try and hybridize human ape, kind of a medium between that, and lots of strange stuff like that. And so it's a very interesting sort of Pandora's box. I mean, everyone talks about these sci-fi movies like Jurassic Park and these sorts of things where they are unleashing forces that they can't quite understand. And maybe we are doing that. Maybe all these sci-fi movies are a good warning to not kind of mess with this sort of stuff. But yeah, it's a very interesting area.
Well, just like when you put recessive alleles together, you have a greater likelihood that something that's latent is going to come out, and usually it's lethal, but occasionally it's genius.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said. I think we're really going to be reaching that stage, and I think even with a lot of AI sort of stuff, we're able to kind of interface people with these sort of technologies. And we already have prosthetic limbs and hearts and those sorts of things, but we're going to see much more an increase in that in the future. And that can't be said that it's all negative, of course. I mean, there are certain things that will benefit people, and even just with modern medicine now that we have, people are living longer, they have longer lifespans because we're able to get rid of certain things. But it's not always as clean cut, and it's not black and white. Of course, there's a lot of gray area.
I wanted to go back to the stories of people that are able to breed, have had children with Sasquatch. You were talking about they did the genetic test on the Alma. What was it? That was from Russia. What were they called? The Alma? I think
in that area. So in Siberia they kind of called them the Almas. I think in the Caucasus it's Almasty. Of course, these are terms that are just sort of floating around on the internet. I don't know if you were to go to the Caucasus and ask someone about an Almasty, maybe there's a different local word they might use, like there are in the U.S. There's the skunk ape in the South. There's the grassman in Ohio. The wood devils up here in New Hampshire. There's a lot of different regional names that people might be more familiar with than sort of the overarching names. But yeah, that was one of those cases where that's a story. I mean, it's another interesting case that I was just reading about recently, which I've known about for a while, happened in also in the Caucasus during the Russian Revolution, or rather the Russian Civil War, when you had the Red Army and the White Army, the sort of royalists. There was a story where there was a group of these White Army soldiers, and they were approaching a cave, which was reported to have Red Army soldiers hiding and kind of stowing away. And they positioned themselves. They were hearing noises coming out of the cave, and some sort of a hairy man-like creature came running out of the cave, at which point the group of soldiers killed it, and they examined the body, and then they buried it because they thought it was a monstrosity or something along those lines. I have no idea if that's a real story or not. It's a very interesting folkloric story, and that's where a lot of this sort of stuff, for example, with the Zana story about villagers that are descended from Zana, what is the truth of it? Is it just folklore? Because if it's just folklore, that's very interesting in itself. I'm very interested in a lot of that sort of stuff, especially here in my local context in New England. Why do these stories exist? You have these old logging stories of people seeing hairy man-like creatures. That's something I tell people who are perhaps a little bit more on the denial side, who haven't really looked into a lot of the sightings and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying I'm 100% a believer, but I like to be skeptical in all aspects of it. And something I tell people is, hey, even if it's all made up, it's still interesting that this folklore forms, because you have folklore about dragons, about other mystical creatures and mystical entities throughout history, and that in itself is very interesting, because that's an examination of us as a species, why do we have these stories, and are they actually based in perhaps some reality? And I think that's where a lot of cryptozoologists and a lot of people interested in this subject kind of are bridging the gap between stories of creatures that may be true and then stories that just pervade human history.
Go ahead, Sasha.
That's a fascinating. Well, first of all, that's a really great approach. In a sense, if you have the kind of perspective, I'm an existentialist. If I have the perspective, if something is alien to me, it's resonating with a part of me that I can get in touch with by centering myself between that fractal of the universe that is that apparent other. That may sound like a bunch of words, but it works for me anyhow. And so that what that means is what is it for me to be Homo erectus? And for me, that means I'm in touch with my part that is intuitive. I feel things with my heart. I don't take baths and I stink. But there's a number of things that, whatever it means to me or to whoever it is that sees the apparent other, what the Russians said about Alma is that this was a child, a 13-year-old child, that the Russians captured and made as a slave. So that hits with your idea that she might be a slave. But she was a slave, and the Russian men all had sex with her, and she had lots of babies. She killed the first few by bathing them in the icy river right away, but then the Russians caught on, and her children became normal Russians, and they were regarded as ugly, but they intermarried. And the researchers actually buried up and looked at the skeleton of one of her grandchildren, and that was used for the sampling. That's what the literature says anyhow. Right.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting because, that if it was perhaps that, like I mentioned, that she was just a Homo erectus, or Homo sapien from Africa, and that is the case. I mean, that in itself is, how did this story of just somebody from a different area morph into this sort of hominid kind of hairy creature? But it's hard to say. I mean, I can. There's a story in British Columbia of something named Jacko, which was this kind of ape-like creature that was reportedly captured and put in a sort of display in a cage. And some people thought it was an escaped chimp. Some people said, no, this was a baby Sasquatch or a juvenile, whatever the case may be. You have other stories. And like I said, with some of the older stories, you have the stories of the wild men. I mean, a lot of the cases described here in New England and other places where people described it as a wild, feral human being, much more human-like than perhaps some of the more modern Bigfoot characteristics of it being a sort of ape. People, and maybe that's just the way that the language, because they didn't have an understanding. I mean, one of the most fascinating aspects for me is some of the tribal artwork that's been done. You have these tribes, particularly in the West Coast, in British Columbia and that sort of area, the coastal Salish tribes and a lot of those groups. They have incredible totem pole artwork and masks, ceremonial masks and costumes that look just, one of these costumes looks like sort of a cartoonish version of a Sasquatch costume or Bigfoot costume you might buy off of Amazon. Very, very similar. And this was something that was made in the 1840s because this is part of their tribal ritual. And a lot of these masks have these facial features that look like, if you've ever seen a chimp making vocalizations or noises. So it really begs the question of where would people that are living in an isolated part of British Columbia have sort of a knowledge of what an ape's facial features might look like unless they directly observed something of that sense. So that is extremely interesting. And then across the country, you have examples of that. And, in upstate New York, the Iroquois had
like Hanuman.
Yeah. I mean, the Hindu god, exactly, yeah. You have these things across the world, essentially. And like I mentioned earlier with the wood woes, too, if you look at, there's these, I have a whole collection of a lot of these photos, but there's one of a knight, and he's battling this tall, hairy creature that has this big log, and the knight is a medieval knight, typical kind of Knights of the Round Table, that sort of thing you might expect. He's got a sword, and it's slicing the big log that this creature is holding, and it was considered kind of he was facing off a beast or a demon, whatever the case may be. But it looks just like a Bigfoot sort of depiction. Very interesting. In upstate New York, the Iroquois was called the Stone Giants, and I have this great picture. Old picture of these three natives being chased by these two very tall creatures that wouldn't really be. You couldn't say that was a different tribe because they were so distinct in the way they drew it. And these creatures were carrying these big sticks, and they're clearly taller than the Indians. And what were those things? Was it just all folklore, or was there a creature involved in that? And I think, like I said earlier about how we are starting to learn a lot more about human evolution. our origins and how much more complex it is than meets the eye or that was presented, in 20 years from now, we'll probably have a totally different understanding based on discovering new species that existed and new hominids and maybe new creatures in the Homo line. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist or involved in that sort of stuff, paleontology, but I'm very fascinated, and I always have been. And from when I was a kid, what we know has changed, I think, pretty dramatically just based off of 3 or 4 discoveries.
Yeah, there's such a sympathy between the cats and humans, and the ancient literature talks about migrations from the Lyran group, that somehow we are connected with cats, and that we automatically feel it when they purr, when they lay on your belly and you have a bellyache, and there's some affinity that's quite amazing. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it. You have throughout history, why are cats and dogs revered? I mean, cats in particular have a sort of mysticism to them, and anyone who's been around a house cat or has had a cat can understand that there's this connection, and we have this connection with animals. I mean, we're all in tune, and what exactly is the origin of that? But I had an interesting story told to me actually by somebody recently, where they said that they had seen a mountain lion in captivity out somewhere in the West Coast. This person was a biologist, and they had said, that suddenly he locked eyes with this animal, and it told him, come up and pet me in the cage. And, he's saying, hey, what is this? If this is true, can you walk up? Can you prove it? This is totally crazy. And he says that the animal proceeds to then go up to the sort of fence or whatever it was and just put its back right there. And, I mean, that's a sort of like a telepathic connection. I mean, this sort of stuff.
Wow.
This stuff is very interesting. And I think people kind of are surprised when I say this, but I don't really believe in the paranormal. That's what I kind of tell people. The reason I say that is because I think what we deem as paranormal, so maybe these sort of phenomena that we just can't understand, is precisely that. It's just something that we cannot understand right now at this moment in time. Like I said, with infrasound, I mean, you could take a cell phone 150 years ago, try and explain to someone. I can send a message to somebody in Germany, and it'll arrive instantaneously, and they'll say, you're crazy, this is magic, you're a wizard. I mean, imagine 100 years from now what we'll know about communication and our brain power. I mean, I've had experiences that are kind of unsettling, where you have a dream that turns out to be a reality, that sort of thing. So I don't know how to explain it. I had a dream once that there was a tsunami, and I woke up to, or literally the first thing I read was very tragic news that there was a tsunami that had happened somewhere in Thailand or Indonesia or one of these areas. So these sorts of things happen, and animals certainly. I mean, Dr. Dolittle, of course, is a kind of a funny movie, but there are people who can communicate with animals much better than others for whatever reason. So there's something going on there. That's not just all made up. I mean, it's kind of it's crazy.
It's real. You can feel it. You can feel. One of the things that some other people have been telling me about is that the climate change has been causing a whole species to change. Not just a trickle down of big cats or up of big cats from the south, but like polar bears heading for Brazil and all kinds of things that indicate following the warmth that these and the climates that these creatures need. Are you getting any data on that stuff?
Not really. No. I typically, like I said, I tend to focus more on the Bigfoot and that sort of stuff and the big cats, but I'm very interested in a lot of these other phenomena as well. I don't really know too much about that specific sort of stuff that you're talking about, but like I said, I think animals, they're obviously in tune with the earth and the kind of changes, probably much more than we are. And there are certain people, humans, that are more in tune than others, and a lot of our just natural instincts that 200 years ago, people living in North America, you would have had the ability to make fire on a whim or hunt for your own food. A lot of these instincts that we had just in general were kind of beat out of us since we've lived in very organized societies where you can just order essentially anything to your doorstep at this point. So just losing those sort of instincts. But then there's people who obviously can tune more into something that you cannot see, because a lot of people are seeing as believing. And like I said, there are certain things that I think are intangible in the sense that you cannot really explain it by being able to poke it and prod it, that there's certain phenomena between brain waves and infrasound, whatever these things may be, these sorts of, try to understand what a text message is. I mean, that's insane enough. If you start reading about that and what these, and radio signal and these sorts of things and how people are able to figure this out, like I said, that would be deemed as magic or wizardry in some ancient time.
Wow. That's one of the interesting things I found about humans in my studies, that even though we don't understand it, if we get the idea, because we have a collective consciousness and we work together, we figure it out. We download it either with help or without help.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's why we're the top predator, right? Is because we work together and we have a larger brain capacity that's able to kind of problem solve better than other species. And that doesn't mean, and if it was you versus a big cat, in a lot of these cases, the big cat would win because it has an overwhelming amount of force as opposed to you. But take a group of 10 people with guns and one big cat, who's going to come out on top? And that sort of acting in a collective and in sort of your best interest sort of thing.
Yeah. Send one guy out as bait and get the cat.
Let's talk about the Loch Ness creatures that people are seeing all over the planet.
Sure.
What do you know about them? And are they a category, or are we just calling them all Loch Ness? What do we call them?
Lake monsters.
An overall name for these.
Yeah, I think
lake
monsters. Lake monsters, and there's the idea of aquatic cryptids. So cryptids would be a cryptid would be an unidentified creature. So that could include anything from out-of-place mountain lions or escaped pets in some instances to creatures like Bigfoot and that sort of thing on that sort of spectrum. But sorry, what was your question again? It was about lake monsters, the categorization.
Tell us about lake monsters. What do you know about lake monsters?
They're very interesting. I mean, there's thousands of lakes around the world that claim to have creatures that are existing in there, whether they're identified or not. And I think some lakes have more validity than others. I wouldn't say all of them automatically have lake monsters in them. Some can be explained by large species of fish that, by definition, if you were to see a 7-foot fish, I mean, that's a monster. They just found last week in the Hudson River in New York, sonar was able to identify a 14-foot long sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon that was living. I mean, can you imagine a 14-foot long sturgeon just swimming right up next to your boat? That would be, by definition, a monster. I mean, that's like seeing a large alligator or a large great white shark. I mean, that's the size comparison. That's huge. I mean, that's monstrous. And you have these stories in the Hudson River case where the sturgeon has sort of a comeback. You had in the 1800s, people would say that the sturgeon were so plentiful, and there's all this artwork of these giant sturgeon, and those were kind of just seen as tall tales. But you have now confirmation there's a giant sturgeon in a river. So a lot of these lakes, maybe that's the case. But then there's some like Lake Champlain and like Loch Ness that sort of stick out because of the very uncharacteristic description of what the creature sort of is. And it's kind of almost prehistoric in nature in a lot of the eyewitness descriptions. And I don't really know what's going on, but I think in a place like Lake Champlain, which I've looked into pretty heavily, that there's something weird going on in this lake. I don't know exactly what's going on, and at times, there's multiple things happening. But if you look at the history of the lake itself and the way it was formed, it's extremely enticing, very, very interesting area because there's so much sort of history and other species that have lived in that area, and it seems like a lot of these lakes that are in the northern hemisphere, a lot of formerly glacial lakes, so these were lakes that were formed by glaciers, have a lot of these monster sightings. I don't know exactly what the reason for that is, but a place like Lake Champlain and Loch Ness are pretty similar in the sense that they're both connected to the ocean in certain spots, and they were connected to the ocean at a much greater extent in the recent past, especially in the case of Lake Champlain.
Do you think that some of these may extend all the way down to like the inner Earth? Remember the what was that, the Journey to the Center of the Earth, where they had all these mythical beings that survived from the surface, and there's stories that there are rivers and lakes underneath our rivers and lakes. Do you think maybe some of these creatures can come up from other bodies of water that are deeper into the earth?
I don't really know. I mean, I've heard those stories, of course. I think a lot of people have. And the concept in a place like Loch Ness or Lake Champlain, there's an idea that there's perhaps tunnels that connect other bodies of water. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't sound extremely likely to me, but I'm certainly not an expert. And I think a place like Lake Champlain has the prospect of underwater caves, which are, would be kind of game-changing. There are known caves that exist around Lake Champlain that are above ground now, above the water level, rather, that existed because Lake Champlain was actually part of something called the Champlain Sea only about 14,000 years ago, around the time of the last ice age. And that means humans were in that area around that time. And Lake Champlain was part of the ocean, and there were beluga whales, walruses, seals, other marine wildlife that lived in Lake Champlain that we have fossil evidence of, that we found on the shores of the lake and in other areas that corroborate that, the lake itself was a much larger part of a much larger body of water. And as the glaciers receded, it gradually got cut off. And there's the possibility of a lot of the larger fish species in the lake actually being directly descended from ocean fish. So you have the Atlantic sturgeon, the Atlantic sturgeon there in the lake. It's a lake sturgeon now. You have the Atlantic salmon, which are landlocked, which live in Lake Champlain, and that probably is something that adapted from the ocean as well. Sea lampreys. There's a bunch of other fish that are possibly from that time period. So kind of some of the theories are perhaps something larger also adapted, whereas animals like whales and seals perished because those are mammals in need of much more resources, that maybe something either reptilian or amphibian that was larger managed to survive and adapt. And that's sort of one of the theories. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I have certain days where I think to myself, wow, there really is something to the Champ mystery. And other days where I say, it just seems like there's so many perfect circumstances here that it creates this sort of illusion that there's maybe something going on. And I kind of flutter between that a lot. And it's been an interesting, I guess just period of observing this sort of mystery for the past couple of years, because I was first interested in the Loch Ness Monster, and I visited there, and I kind of lost interest in that. But Lake Champlain being right here very close to me, within a couple hours driving, was something that I was heard about, but it's definitely not covered as much as Loch Ness. Loch Ness is very famous. Lake Champlain and the Monster is not as famous. It's famous to a lot of people who are interested in this sort of stuff, cryptozoology, and maybe some of the local folks, but the story is really not that well known. So that's where my documentary series, I tried to kind of examine it in every angle and look at the sort of things that were going on there and try and portray that with as much information as I could.
Thank you. We keep getting reports from the area of the Weddell Sea and others of marine animals, complex ones, octopi looking things that come out dead, but there's indication there's a sea underneath the seas around Antarctica. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, of course, the stories of the giant squid and these sorts of animals that have been, these species that have been discovered that were previously straight out of mythology and folklore, and that's cryptozoologists point to that a lot. Something like the Kraken, it's a story of a giant squid-like creature, and we've discovered recently giant squid do exist. These massive beings that exist in very, very deep depths of the oceans that usually only come up if they're dying or for whatever reason, accidentally come up to the surface, because these animals live at a certain area where there's a lot of pressure in these depths and these environments, that their bodies are mostly kind of gelatinous and very, very loose, or they're not like an animal you might find closer to the surface. But we've proven that animals like that exist, that were based, at least in some aspects, stories of the Kraken and other mythical creatures like that were based on a real being.
Thank you.
Matt, do you have any questions?
Well, what's the most unusual thing you've checked out that's really...
The most unusual? That's a good question. I don't know about there's a lot of unusual stories. You hear a lot of these areas where there's like the spot in Pennsylvania or Bridgewater Triangle, where there's seems like there's a lot of stuff going on in the same place. So there's Bigfoot being sighted, giant birds, UFOs, strange lights, a lot of things going on in the same areas, which is pretty fascinating. Overall, there's a particular area in Pennsylvania I've worked on actually with Paul and Ben Eno and a couple other colleagues. I know you've had them on the program as well, and we've kind of postulated on some of these sorts of areas and the concept that maybe there's flap areas where there's entrances to other dimensions. And I don't know. I mean, that's part of the thing I was mentioning about not believing in the paranormal, because we're learning so much about quantum physics as we speak and what is going on, and this possibility that maybe there are separate dimensions or realities, and are there certain places where they might bleed into each other? I don't really know, and most people say this is just a bunch of crazy mumbo jumbo, but the world is a stranger place than most believe. Most people kind of go about their daily lives and don't think things out of the ordinary. So when you start getting into this stuff, you realize, wow, you go down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of interesting stuff to be seen. So I'd say probably the flap area stuff is some of the weirdest stuff I've seen. I mean, I approached this particular case with more interest in the Bigfoot side, because I had been told that there was a lot of sightings in this area, very good eyewitnesses, and interviewing folks. They were reporting stuff that I've heard in other parts of the country, same sort of behaviors and mimicking of chickens and these sorts of things. And it was very fascinating. But you had all these other things going on in this same area, where it doesn't just happen in any place. Some places Bigfoot is just seen and there's not really anything else going on, whereas here there's other phenomena happening. So it really makes you wonder, what is actually going on, and having strange experiences in a place like that, what does that even mean?
Well, have you noticed a big connection between UFOs and Bigfoot?
Not really. I mean, I know a lot of people like to talk about that, and I think it's a little bit more perhaps enticing to say, oh, there's a connection with that too. From what I can tell in my readings and people I've talked to, 95% of the people I've spoken to regarding Bigfoot, there hasn't been anything paranormal or unusual in that sense. So what I'm trying to say is, in the sense that what they observed would be similar to what you would observe if you saw any other biological animal. So if you were to see a mountain lion or a deer, you'd see a physical creature there. It wouldn't just disappear into a ball of light. There are some people I've talked to that have said, there were either telepathic elements or some sort of disappearing or connection with strange lights. I wouldn't say that's the majority, just based on my experience, but that definitely is part of it. And I think a lot of people have ignored some of that stuff up until now. And I think it's definitely valid to look at that stuff, because maybe there is a connection. I don't know. I mean, I have not, like I said, I have not experienced really anything that's pushed me one way or the other. But who am I to really deny people's experiences and just write them off immediately just because they said something I didn't really agree with or didn't fit my hypothesis, so I kind of ignore that detail? No, I'm going to take their report and try and understand what it is they're saying and try and put myself in their shoes as best I can without sort of stepping on them and telling them flat out I don't believe it or whatever the case may be.
What about the stories of people disappearing in parks? Maybe Bigfoot got some of them.
I don't know. I mean, that's something you'd probably have to ask someone like David Paulides about. He's sort of the one who kind of pioneered that sort of stuff. I don't know. I mean, I've read some of the disappearances, and they're very interesting. And there's definitely seems to be clusters of them in certain areas. And I mean, people disappear, people go missing for a variety of reasons. You'd be surprised how easily somebody who's maybe not as in tune with the wilderness can just totally do irrational things that they would normally never ever do. But in a moment of panic, everything goes out the door. Especially, like I said, we've had our instincts beaten out of us. I spend a good amount of time in the woods, do a lot of hiking, and you see all sorts of people out there hiking that, they act irrational and crazy because something happened or they got hurt or something. And it's like, why would you ever think to do that? And, it's sort of fight or flight mode going on in their head. So I don't really know. I mean, there are stories of people saying that they, were kidnapped by creatures or taken or that, but I don't really know the validity, of course, because I haven't really looked into that as deeply as I have other things. But I can just say, just from experience, people will act very strange when they're lost or they're hungry, dehydrated, hypothermia. These sorts of things can be very lethal in areas where people are at a high risk for disappearing, in like a national park or a national forest. You go 50 feet off the trail, you may never be seen again. You may fall into a hole and that's the end of it. And it's just seemingly very, very interesting. But there's probably some cases like some of the ones I've read that are a little bit weirder. People saying they saw a giant bear walking away with a kid in its hands, in North Carolina or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's definitely. I just got a book, for example, that a friend of mine did the illustrations for. It's an old book about some of the campfire stories from northern New Hampshire, and there's a bunch of stories about bears that holler, and there are a lot of mountain lion stories. But there's also supposedly a story which I'm trying to look into. My friend told me about it. He said, there's a story about a little girl who claims to have been lost in the woods one time, and some really tall man in a black fur coat took her with him and then led her back to town eventually, but kept her safe essentially during the winter. So pretty interesting kind of stuff like that.
That just happened about a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Where was that at again?
I can't remember, but she was lost in the woods for 2 days.
Oh, that's a different one. That was a story in I think it was actually coincidentally also North Carolina or one of these states where it was a little boy or a little girl claimed to have been was lost for a couple of days and in very cold temperatures, below zero sort of temperatures, and that they were hanging out with a bear or some kind of bear helped them. I don't know. The story I was referring to was actually a story about in the Smoky Mountain National Park where a boy went missing with, right essentially near his family. Just they turned around, he was gone. And I think it was the Green Beret or some military unit was called in eventually to help for the search. But at the time, people had reported seeing some kind of large gorilla or bear-like creature walking away with something over its shoulders. This was a case, I think, that happened all the way back in the 1940s or 50s, even the 60s. Very hazy on the details, but that's one of those ones that I've heard from David Paulides and some of the other people kind of propagating that missing in the park sort of thing.
Lloyd Pite had told me that he was on the trail of this guy had shot one of these. It turns out about a 12-year-old Sasquatch and preserved it, and he was taking it around to towns, showing people this wild boy that he shot, and I forget what finally happened to it, and then Lloyd died before he could complete whatever happened to that body. But what I would urge people with guns, don't shoot the Sasquatch.
Yeah, there's been stories. I mean, I've never heard of that story, but I have heard of other stories, some of which have turned out to be hoaxes or tall tales. Like the Minnesota Iceman is kind of a famous one, which is recognized widely as a hoax, where it was sort of one of these roadside attractions back in the day. We're talking the middle of the 20th century and that sort of time period when there was a lot of this sci-fi and a lot of these films going on. There was something that was going on at malls, and it was billed as the Minnesota Iceman, that it was this Bigfoot-like creature that was kept in a crate, and you would pay $5 or whatever the case may be to go and see it, and it was interesting. And the story supposedly behind that was that it was actually a creature that was killed in Vietnam by some soldiers there, and it was brought back. And I think it's regarded as a hoax. But you do have stories of GIs from Vietnam reporting seeing what they called rock apes, and there are sightings in Vietnam and some of these Southeast Asian countries of also these hairy man-like creatures that are not as big as the 8-foot tall sort of Sasquatch in North America, but a smaller stature, and that they would throw rocks in their direction. And there was some American soldiers, veterans there from Vietnam, who claimed to have encountered some of these creatures and shot at them, and thinking they were enemy combatants, turning out to be some sort of other being. So there's a lot of those sorts of stories of creatures being captured. There was a story from just this past 10 years ago where a guy claimed to kill a large Sasquatch and then the babies, and he killed it. And I think that one also turned out to be a hoax. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of stories like that, and there's a lot of details that get lost in translation, but there's, like I was mentioning, with stories like people being supposedly kidnapped in the 1950s or Jacko in the 1800s and other cases like this where that becomes part of sort of a folklore almost. And that's very interesting. Why did that even come about?
What is the Bridgewater Triangle what is the Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts? We're
Yes.
coming up in the last few minutes of the show. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I can describe that relatively quickly. It's sort of an area of south of Boston, near Rhode Island, in southeastern Massachusetts, described as a sort of triangle, because that's one of these things that kind of sticks out in your mind. You know, Bermuda Triangle, Golden Triangle, whatever. It's a geographical area, and there's a phenomena that goes on. You know, people have all sorts of paranormal experiences, Bigfoot and UFOs and strange lights and ghosts and that sort of stuff happens in this sort of smaller area. And it's interesting because that area was where there was one of the first wars between the English colonists and the Wampanoag tribe, and there's a swamp right in the middle of this triangle called the Hockomock, called the place where spirits dwell, a sort of haunted swamp that even the natives kind of kept out of. But they had a war with the English, and the Wampanoags then kind of retreated into this swamp, and it's called King Philip's War. And some of the other tribes allied with the English, and it was a very brutal conflict, very bloody. And supposedly there was a curse placed on the area by King Philip, who was Natacoma or something along those lines. I'm not exactly familiar what his real name was. He was called King Philip by the English, sort of derogatory term, or derision at him. But supposedly there was a curse put in the area, and since then people have had strange things going on. And I think I caution that a little bit in the modern sense, because I think a place like that has sort of a built-up reputation. So then people seek it out specifically. Oh, we want to go and have an experience, and maybe they have something go on that was totally explainable, but they then say it was a ghost or something like that. So I think I should caution that a little bit. But there are other areas, like I mentioned with this Pennsylvania case, which is relatively unknown, where there are things going on that are very weird. But the Bridgewater case is interesting. I looked into that just on the Bigfoot side, people seeing Bigfoot, and it's not a very large area, and it's in a pretty urban center, but it's an impenetrable swamp. In some areas, I could only get through by just flying my drone over it and getting an aerial shot, because there's quicksand and there's kind of treacherous areas that you don't really want to get in and get stuck in. I mean, it's a swamp, so it's like a swamp is a swamp. I mean, it's not like something you're going to find in Louisiana, but it's still something treacherous, and especially in the summer, you've got all kinds of snakes and flies and quicksand. Like I said, a very dangerous sort of area to hang out.
Well, and then we're running out of time here, but let's see. There's what is the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea?
Yeah, I think the name says it all. Just kind of when I was a little bit younger and perhaps ill-advised, I decided to go on a trip to North Korea as a tourist. This was this was 2015, so a little while ago now. Recent enough, but there's a lot of controversy, a lot of developments in the international scene since then. But at the time I went was very interesting. You go as a tourist, and it's sort of a propaganda tour, and the government kind of takes you around and shows you different areas, and it's interesting because you kind of experience that last vestige of what sort of a totalitarian communist state kind of is like. I mean, my family is from the former Yugoslavia, which was socialist, but we had a dictatorship and that sort of socialism and that sort of thing. And it's very interesting just seeing North Korea at that time period. I mean, I know now it's different. It's something that was always evolving in the news with North Korea, but it was an interesting experience.
And what do you want to tell us about the conference that's coming up?
Oh, I heard don't take any posters off the wall while you're in North Korea.
Yeah, don't do that, please.
Definitely not. That's crazy. That guy, that was, I think, a month out. I was there in November. He was there in December, the guy who tragically, died once he was released into custody, U.S. custody, I think last year or just about 2 years ago. A very sad story. If you're going to a place like North Korea, I always tell people this, if you're traveling to any other country, anywhere, you want to be respectful of their customs and their rules, and it's going to be different. But if there's a place to ever be super respectful and just suspend your personal beliefs for 5 minutes, or for the whole trip, it would be a place like North Korea. You don't want to cause any provocation or anything like that. You're already putting yourself in enough danger just by going there. That has to be stated. Now it's of course illegal for Americans to visit there based off of what happened to this kid, but you really want to be cautious in a place like that. Don't do stupid things. And I saw stupid things that happened that people drink when they would drink at night in the hotel, and cause a little bit of discomfort because you think, oh man, they're tolerating us essentially.
We're out of time. Sorry. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thanks for having
you, listeners.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Aloha. And you gave us lots. Thank you.
No problem. Bye.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed. People working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. This country is founded on great ideals and principles. They've all been ruined by the banks. Open your eyes, the banks got a lot of you. You know who my favorite president was? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. Yep. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution.
Maybe you should try it again, because I don't know if it's like a bad connection on this place.
War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank.